I'm here with Faina Vitebsky. It's so great to see you again.
Thank you for having me. Last time our conversation was more financially based, and I look forward to just talking about life.
Exactly. Well, I'd love to start off because you're in Puerto Rico, and I think it's a really cool story about how you ended up there. So can we start with taking you back to the craziness of 2020 and where you were and how you made the move?
Absolutely. I was in New York City, and we were one of the few first places, I think, to get severely hit by the COVID virus. And at the time, it felt like everyone around me was either infected or dying. And the numbers were like 800 and something per day. And we had a situation where, I was living in this beautiful building on the 12th floor overlooking the river in Empire State Building. And, as you can imagine, the New York rents are just ridiculously high prior to COVID. Now it's a whole other story. But the expensive apartments became sort of like a prison because you couldn't go anywhere. And I lived on 42nd and 12th, which means, it's right by the water, but also it has a lot of people who are addicted to drugs and stuff like that on that 42nd Street because it was a really prime panhandling street for tourists. And they took a lot of for some reason, they started taking these people, and, I felt for them, but mattresses. So they set up forts. And so they would be like little, almost like villages as you walk down 42nd Street. And because there wasn't enough foot traffic, people were getting really agitated and aggravated because they weren't getting the drug fixes that they needed. And so it became just straightforward dangerous. And then they took all the hotels that were around my building and turned them into shelters for the homeless. And so the crime rate went up significantly. And me being, a single woman in New York City, my little walk up and down the street, I got a note from my management company saying, don't go outside after dark. People are getting hurt and robbed and all of that. So there's so much pacing you can do. People come in hazmat suits, like to your door to deliver food and all of that other stuff. And there was a moment, I lived like that for, I think, on 3 or 4 months. And I remember it was beginning of July, and I was like, I'm losing my mind. I'm literally losing my mind. So I knew I needed to go and be with nature. And I always planned on going and living by the beach. And I thought, you know what? There's no time like the present. The world has stopped. So let's just go. I picked up one suitcase. I had 3 pairs of shoes and 5 dresses. And I went just to see if I liked it. And as soon as I got here, a week later, I called my mom and I said, sell everything.
Wow.
And basically I started over with a suitcase. I didn't know anyone here. I had one friend I kind of knew from like way back when. And as you can imagine, like the pandemic, no one's out. The curfew here was really severe, 7 p.m. lockdown. The people, for a moment during COVID, we partied with reason. And so the fear was so, especially in Puerto Rico, where it's a small island. So if it gets overwhelmed by COVID, they're not going to make it. So like the rules were super, super tight. Like we couldn't stand still on the beach. Like it's bizarre, right? Like I had to walk up and down to be able to be on the beach. I got yelled at for going in the water and standing still, which is just impossible. There are waves. I'm not still. I'm like, allow me the moment to like get in the water. And so it was like all of that. But even I didn't know anyone. I spent a lot of time with myself. I went from a very busy social life and living in a building with like thousands of people to finding a little house and living by myself. And I think there were days where I didn't say a word to another living being because there was nobody to talk to. And I think I went like 25 days straight without talking to other people at all. Well, I mean, at the store when you got some groceries, but just no interaction at all. And I think during those times, you have a lot of time to reflect, a lot of time to make peace with yourself, and just a lot of times to develop your hobbies. I started painting.
So because I feel like with most of Western life, one of the big problems I'm seeing with myself and with other people is I look at my dad when I was growing up, and he was a pilot. So I guess that's a slightly different model in the sense that you're gone for maybe 3-4 days, then you're back for 4 days. But when he was either gone at work or he was home, 100% present. And now I work in real estate, which is a 7 days a week, 365 days a year kind of job. And people don't respect whether you get messages early in the morning, you get messages throughout the day, you get messages at night. It's very, very difficult to have those boundaries. And you went from having this hectic, crazy life, one of the busiest cities in the world, to being completely secluded. So now looking back 3 years later, do you think that it's healthy, us living in cities? Because I recently left Chicago, and as much as there's a lot of positives, especially when you're young, just the social aspect and things to do on your doorstep, I just don't think it's healthy. I was like you in a high rise. You're always stacked on top of each other. And that was before, obviously, the crime's gone up in pretty much every US city. But even before the higher crime, I just don't think that's the healthiest way to live, where you just so many people stacked on top of each other in these tiny little areas.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever go back. Like, I'm not going back. And every time I visit, I feel suffocated because I don't think as human beings we're supposed to live that close of proximity to one another. I think there's just a healthy distance for everyone to have a little bit of privacy, a little bit of peace. In New York City, you get on the subway, there's someone's armpit in your face. There's just no getting away from it. Anywhere you go to a restaurant, people are screaming and you can't hear yourself think. You go to a bar, you are definitely going to get spilt on. So, it was just one of those things. All of a sudden, all the activities here are outdoors. And I always kept reminding myself, no matter how lonely I got, that look where I am, right? Like, I was on the ocean. I was sitting in the sand. When they allowed us to finally sit down in the sand. But, I could take my mask off. I could breathe. I could stare at something so wonderful, and you just start I feel like we don't appreciate what's around us as much because we're so busy, especially in big cities. We're surviving, right? The survival mode. You just go through life. And I reflected and I'm like, there's so much time where the days kind of molded into one. And I can't tell you what I did that day or something beautiful I saw that day or noticed or like appreciated a sunrise. I mean, from the time you open your eyes, you were just going into this full drive of going and trying to make ends meet. And so there was something very confronting because I was so busy being busy that I didn't work on myself quite as much as I should have because the issues were not as glaring as when you get left with yourself, right? And you sit there and there's no one to take the edge off and there's nowhere you can do to like unwind or I guess kind of distract yourself, right? And you're left with yourself. And I think that was the most confronting and transformative time for me because like the noise stopped, the world stopped. Everyone around me stopped.
But that idea of being constantly distracted, cell phones are so incredible on the positives, just because you can always just go online and start reading fascinating articles. You can listen to amazing audiobooks and podcasts. There's so much great content. There's so much great information that you never, ever do any deep thinking unless you have periods of being undistracted. And it's so hard, especially if you work in a business where you're connected. And that's why I find any time that if I want to reevaluate the direction of my life or make big decisions, I can never do it at home. I have to always be on vacation. And I feel like even though when I'm on vacation, I still tend to work a few hours a day, I'm in a different environment and I get a bit more downtime. And then I can kind of analyze things like, I need to make some changes in this area of my life. But during the day to day, there's just no time. So I know exactly what you mean.
The silence was deafening, the silence was absolutely deafening. And you start to go, well, I just read for an hour. What else can I do? You're like, well, now I can walk to the beach again. Okay, great. You can. And that was the time I'm like, all right, I'm going to rescue a dog because the stray animal issue here is really a large one. There's a lot of them everywhere. So I'm like, all right, let me find me a companion. So I went and I picked up what I thought was going to be a small dog. It turned out to be a 50-pound terrier. And, you don't know. And he's like my best friend now. And so then I figured, okay, so that's companionship, right? So you start to like redefine what you thought of like being alone. So alone wasn't that alone anymore because I'm like, well, I always wanted to paint. Let me paint. So I went and I got paints, and I was never really bored. Right. It's interesting because when you have all of this stuff, people say, I'm bored. I'm like, oh my goodness. So you have everything at your disposal. I found myself never being really bored. You've become like super peaceful where you don't need to do things as much. Mm. It was a very interesting transformation. I felt like I didn't have to or speak to anyone. I just could just be, just exist. And that was good enough. Yeah. So that was an interesting epiphany I had.
One thing I remember when I was super depressed in Chicago, just like you, everything was locked down. And I remember going for a run on the lakefront at 11 o'clock at night, not a soul around. And then a few miles down, these cops stopped me and they're like, the lakefront's kind of closed. And I was talking to them. They didn't want to stop me. I knew they thought it was so stupid. I'm like, well, I haven't seen anyone in 2 miles. And they're like, yeah, just go ahead. But I just remember the crazy rules, and I was real, like everybody, so frustrated because you couldn't do anything, you couldn't work, had all these restrictions, couldn't do anything. And then I remember finally things opened up a little bit, and my wife and I took our 2 dogs and went down to Tennessee. And I remember on the drive, we got a big coffee and we're just talking for the first time about things that we'd never talked about in our relationship. And I was like, listen, like, I can't live like this. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know what I'm going to do for money, because my business is, in real estate, it was kind of tied to a city. But I said, just so you know, my mind is thinking like it's time to have a real change. I was thinking Spain, like find a nice little beach town.
Spain, me too.
Beach town in Spain. It's real. I know that some of those areas are very cheap compared to Chicago, and a just complete change of life. And I remember having the conversation, and I have no idea what she said. And she was like, sounds great. I'm up for it. And I remember having this relief, like, cause it's so difficult when you're in a relationship like that and you face this big lifestyle change like COVID, you don't know how people are going to react. And if you have, I'm sure there were some relationships where one person was like super scared, didn't want to do anything. And the other person was like, no, this is overblown. I want to see my friends. I want to do things. And that caused some massive rifts. A lot of relationships broke up. A lot of people weren't used to spending all this time together in relationships. And suddenly they're like, Jesus, I don't even like this person. Now I'm spending 24 hours a day with them. So it's just such an interesting time. But I remember being so relieved. But even so, the fact that you just did that and said, told your mom, sell everything, you moved with a suitcase. Do you remember how you felt in terms of fear? Like, because a lot of people talk about wanting to do things like that, but then they never actually do it because of all the different, the fear and just all the logistics and it's not easy just to pick up and move somewhere so far. Yeah. How is your mindset? Were you just like, I'll figure it out as I go? Or are you pretty strategic and you say, I've got to do this?
No, there was no strategy. I am not very strategic when it comes to, like, I work from like my soul speaking to me, and I trust that, and so when I got quiet, I knew that there was no way for me to go back. There's just no way. I didn't have a plan. I'm a trader, so I worked from home. As long as I had internet, I was going to be somehow okay. Although we don't know. I didn't know if the economy was going to collapse. I did not know what was going to happen next, if I would have a job. Obviously, like, I'm learning Spanish, but I'm not fluent. So like getting a job in any industry here was going to be impossible. So I just sat there and I listened to my soul, and I asked myself, what do you want? And followed that. Sometimes I think we think too far ahead, and that causes analysis paralysis, and we don't do anything, right? And so I was saying to myself, can you see the next step? Yes. So take that step. Can you see the next step? Okay. Take that one. Can you see the one after? So literally it was like a number of steps. And basically I became responsive and not reactive. So I would go this way and I'd be like, no. You're like, all right, well, I'll be nimble. I'll go the other way. And it's like, no. Okay, well, I'll try this way. And so you have to become, if you're going to let go, you need to let go. Right? Because I realized nothing was in my control. Not the world economy, not how long it was going to last, nothing. So all I could control is sort of the next step, because that's all I knew. Because you know what? Every morning we woke up, there was something else. So I'm like, listen, get yourself to the next morning. And then next morning, we're going to go to the next morning. And then those string mornings became a path. And so somehow I was just literally going with, today we're gonna, go that way. But in terms of fear, yeah, there was a lot of fear. I'm not in my 20s. I'm not even in my 30s. And so there's this stigma of like a woman, family, children, marriage, and I have none of that. And so I was like, you know what? You always do what you feel is right. So you're still here. So just do it. Do whatever, is your next one step.
Two things you said that I really couldn't agree with more, and I've noticed that I'm trying to trust it more in myself too. The idea of trusting your gut. I feel like anytime you're faced with a big decision, you can do one of the founding fathers of the US, he would have a bit of paper and he put a line down the middle of pros and cons, those kind of lists. But really, anytime you have to normally if you have to try and justify a decision, it's not right. Because anything that is right, you just know. You don't have to write a list of why you should do it. You just know in your heart. So I love the idea of when you trust your subconscious, you're trusting all the things that you've read, thought about, learned that's in you since you were, a little kid. So you should trust that a lot more than trying to justify it with your rational mind, which is just like, oh, well, how am I going to pay the bills? Yeah, I'll be miserable and stay in this career for 20 years. But I love what you said about the decision paralysis, because I've noticed, I was just having a conversation on a previous podcast with a guy who was from Midlands of England, from a real crappy town. He had this terrible job in a factory, no education. He was in an unhappy marriage, and he dreamed about being a writer. And he wrote his first book on a spiral notepad on his bathroom breaks. He'd go in the bathroom stall and write a bit. And eventually he didn't know the first thing about how to get published. He didn't know the first thing about even editing. Then once he had the book, then he found a friend who had a typewriter, and she typed it up for him and she helped correct his English. And then eventually he got introduced to somebody else at a publishing house. And it was this process. And then he got, a dozen rejections or 50 rejections. He got a lot of rejections. Then finally he got it published. But it was like, if he had thought, well, I've got to know an editor, a publisher, all these different things about how to market a book before he even start writing, he didn't know any of that. So he would never have started. And I think there's momentum in starting things, and you just have to, like you did. I think that's so important, whether it's starting a business, whether it's jumping in a relationship, whether it's making a huge move that you feel in your gut, just making the first step. And then some people say, oh, the universe will take care of you. But I think it's just, you'll figure it out as you go.
Yeah. And you got to be nimble, right? Because they say we make plans, God laughs. And so you can have the general idea of how you want life to be, right? Like I have my non-negotiables, whether it be in personal life and relationships with romantically or otherwise, and those are pretty hard lines. And I'm good at boundaries. And so I knew that where I wouldn't go, but there is a beauty in discovery. There's a beauty in not knowing. They say 100%. When all your wishes come true, all your dreams will be shattered, right? So there's I don't think we value the process enough. I think just the adventure, if we looked at life as an adventure and you get on this road trip, right? And you're going, you just say, we're going to go in that general direction. Then everything you encounter is a sense of wonderment and appreciation and excitement. But if you're so rigid and you're like, I'm just going to go this way and this way only, and then okay, you get there, but did you have fun? Was that fun? Was that fun for you? Was it fun for your companion? If you have, a partner, was that fun? Do you even like each other anymore?
Right.
And so
you just reminded me of an ex-girlfriend and an awful trip we had in Hawaii. And that's probably why she's ex-girlfriend. But that's when I like to be a bit spontaneous, and you got to plan a little bit, but I remember the first day, she was like, oh God, this. And she was just doing all this. And I remember thinking, I don't think this is going to work. And of course it didn't work. So there you go.
That fun. And people are like, no. At 2:25, I was supposed to have that coffee. So that's it. The day's ruined, as opposed to hey, I'm just going to have a coffee, but there's this juice bar. Let's try that. There's, you gotta let, I think life is about an energy flow. Everything is energy and anything is a flow. And when you block off the flow, it's like pedaling upstream, and people are like, oh, it's so hard. Well, yeah, that's because you have such rigid ideas about what it is that you need, or who you should be. Why don't you let yourself develop into whatever you're supposed, how can you kind of, I don't know, bloom if you're so restrictive,
I think it takes you really have to have a lot of confidence in yourself to trust kind of trust your gut and trust, like you said, trust following the flow of life. Because I remember when I was young, I didn't have that confidence. And I was always, my mentality was, I'm going to try and use force of will to get what I want in life. And I know this is the direction. I'm going to put everything to go in that way. And that's not, as I get older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I'm realizing that you've got to be open to opportunities, open to career changes, open to all these things. You can't be too rigid because, like you said, you have the plans, you make your plans, and then God laughs at you. And that's life, and I think the more you just accept things, I think it's Taoism where they say the perfect Taoist is Winnie the Pooh, because he just kind of accepts what's happening in life and he just goes with it. And in terms of happiness, that's going to make you a lot happier, just accepting things, as opposed to that. There's a big thing that I've noticed coming from England. England has it too, but I don't think it's bad as America, where you're sort of like, I'm only going to be happy if I have this much money and this much prestige and much more material things. Where I was just listening to this Brazilian, he won a title in the UFC last week. And before 2 fights ago, he was driving an Uber Eats for money. Like he had nothing. And he's still now, he will make money, hopefully, but he still doesn't have very much. And he said, I'm the richest man right now because I have a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful kids. And he's appreciating what he does have instead of focusing on, I don't have money or I don't have this. And I think that's such a good lens to view life for happiness.
Yeah, I'm actually reading this book and it's called The Best Loser Wins, and it pertains to trading. But I also feel like it kind of shifted. The best loser does win, because if you learn how to lose and if you learn how to, for things not to go your way and that you don't make it like life ending and all encompassing and devastating for yourself, because a lot of it we create the devastation. What happens and everything else is our interpretation of what just happened, right? Like it's the meaning we assign to things. I don't necessarily, there's some really devastating things, undeniably the loss of a loved one, and obviously there's some really, but frequently we make things like so devastating, and really it's our interpretation. And like, we don't know how things are going to pan out or why that happened. You just have to be open. And so I keep reminding myself, the best loser wins. And maybe sometimes life didn't go the way you imagined, but maybe it's going to turn out better than you imagined. So
that's so true. There's so many times where you never notice at the time, but you can look back and you say, man, 5 years ago, I had this terrible event that happened, but it actually led to much better things in my life. And it's impossible to see at the time, obviously, but it's nice to have that mindset, because then when you do have misfortune, you try to look on the bright side and try to not let it define you or bring you down, but just to see the lessons you can learn from it or what other opportunities it might open. And I can say that with my trading, like when I switched from trading to real estate, it was a really rough year, and I made some big bets that didn't work out. And I'm so glad it happened that way, because if it hadn't, who knows where I'd be now. But I'm happy with where I'm at. But it was
did you die?
Exactly.
But did you die? I always say to people like, I'm like, yeah, but did you die? No, then you're fine. You're fine. Yeah. It's going to be fine. And remember, like, it makes me think about all the people you date and you're like, oh, they left me. I'll never be the same. And then you look back, you're like, holy crap, was I on something? Like, what was I doing? Right. And then you meet someone amazing. You met your wife, and I'm dating someone currently, and you think, if all of that did not happen, I wouldn't be fulfilled in a different way imaginable. But before, I was like, oh no, this is it. I'll never be the same. And I'm like, thank God, I don't want to be the same. Yeah. That's a good thing. It's a good thing. So
that's so true.
I think we're just make everything so important. And so, I think I was mentioning to you, I am definitely neurodivergent, and ADD has been a really big struggle my whole life. I didn't know, like, I wasn't willing to take any medication for it because I don't want to alter the makeup of my brain chemically, right? And or be dependent on something. And for many years working and living with ADD, a severe case of it, it was like it was viewed as like a shortcoming, and I struggle how to like manage this really, really busy, over obsessive mind. So you can imagine how confronting it would be to be alone and a quiet when my mind just is so busy and there's nothing to be like, okay, so this is a distraction. Like, I really had to rein that in. And I struggled because everything was like a monkey mind on a constant loop. And then someone said, have you tried psilocybin? And I said, I don't really, drugs. Is it like, yes, but prior to it, I did ayahuasca. prior to it, some years back, I think like 4 years back, I did ayahuasca, and that was life changing. And if I can recommend it enough, it literally, all the events that made me so charged and felt devastated over and over in that scenario that played in my mind over and over, those 2 days, I can speak of everything that occurred and not feel anything. And so that's how you know that it helped.
Ben, I'd love to talk a bit more about that. Can you, before we do though, can you explain, because like I have a vague idea, but I'm not super clear, neurodivergent, how do you define that?
Neurodivergent are people who are living, like people who have autism, they're neurodivergent, where your brain is wired in a way that is not like a normal brain is wired, right? Where you can follow a logical thought. You don't have a million things happening in your, like a busy highway in your head. You don't constantly have these conversations that we get overstimulated very easily, because my brain is so busy, so that if somebody screams, it makes me like jump, like to the degree, or like sneezes loudly, or a lot of light, a lot of fast moving things, because your brain is so already overloaded that you're hypersensitive to stimuli. It makes it hard to complete a task, because I literally would go and pick up a pen to go write something, and in the process I would like sweep, eat, take out trash, do a million other things, and then come back and be like, crap, I didn't do that one thing. And then the more you try to do that one thing, the less you want to do it. And so you're in a constant fight with yourself.
Do a lot of people, do they take Adderall? Does Adderall
yes.
Okay, so they take that to focus if they have kind of neurodivergent. I guess.
Correct.
So many people take Adderall now, it's out of control. But I'm sure the original use was for people like you, where they had trouble focusing.
Yes, because stimulants for me is calming. So I can have 3 cups of coffee and take a nap. I used to like hydroxycut that you take to go exercise. I would take it and literally pass out. And I'd be like, how am I asleep? But that's crazy. Because a stimulant was literally like knocking me out. And I would be like, I never made it to the gym. What happened? And then you're like, oh, okay. All right. So that is what Adderall does to your brain. It stimulates it and it helps you focus. So basically from like, you get into like a small, like narrow view that you never really have. And you're able to complete tasks without being distracted. You're able to sleep is really difficult though, because the brain keeps going. So it's hard for me to sleep, and you fall asleep and then you wake up, and like I read for hours at night. It's a lot of that. And also overthinking, because you're always looking for like patterns. You're constantly in a pattern recognition, which is probably why I'm a good trader. My brain is able to intake a lot of information at once and be good at a lot of things. But I feel like I never get to breathe because I'm so like overstimulated.
Right. So when did you first hear about ayahuasca, and how was the prep before you even did it? What was the preparation? What was the game plan before?
Well, I wanted to release some of the old trauma because that wasn't helpful. Because when you're neurodivergent, those scenarios play out constantly. So you're constantly re-traumatizing yourself because you're so addicted to cortisol, because that's your brain is functioning its best in a most stressful environment. So your brain starts to create those environments for you, because it's like a druggie. You get that dose of cortisol, and there was a time when I was drinking a lot, and I was like, well, that's not helpful, and then I remember, some other substances people tried, and I'm like, it doesn't do the same thing it does for you that it does for me. And matter of fact, it makes me like calm, and I'm like, holy crap. It's like, this is bizarre, but that you can't rely on that either. That's not sustainable, right? But that is the first time I experienced peace in my mind when the stimulant hit my brain, and I was like, whoa, it's quiet. That's so cool. Like I can do this one thing and actually finish it and not like have a conversation about it. So friends of mine my friends started traveling with this tribe from Costa Rica, and they were doing ayahuasca. And she said, you should try. And I was scared because I don't really do well with psychedelics, because I don't like losing control. Shocker. I don't like losing control of things. I don't like hallucinations. It's not right for me. But there are different types of plants that they use. Ayahuasca is a general term, because the plants, the brew is different for like different indigenous people and the tribe that they're traveling. So It's not the same for everyone. She's like, this one is not trippy, but you will purge a lot. And so it took some talking to myself, and I was like, do you want to release this trauma or not? Because you're angry, you're still hurting. You know, some things happen. Like I come from a difficult, very, very, very difficult traumatizing childhood, you know. And so, but I started to feel like it's a crutch to not move forward. And so I was like, all right, so I'm going to try this ayahuasca thing. And you had to do something called a dieta. So for 3 weeks prior, you had to be completely vegetarian. You had to take out all stimulants. So like there was no coffee, there was no sugar. So you had to eat super, super, super clean. And lastly, you could not engage in sexual activity.
Oh, wow.
Because sexual activity is an exchange, and they want you to come with your personal kind of energy and not affected by another person's baggage or whatever. And so those 3 weeks were tough because, you know, get yourself off coffee, and then
for a lot of people, that's probably by far the toughest. They're like, 3 weeks of no sex, that's okay, but you know, a day without coffee, that's tough.
I had a headache. I had a very, very, very severe headache for a week. A week of no coffee and no sugar. I had migraines for a week, and then it kind of subsided. But the idea is that you come so pure in your state that the medicine can sort of work on your brain and on your neural pathways and on your soul rather than detox you. So those people who didn't follow the diet, that they puked and pooped the whole time. They had no other benefit but detox, and it was clear who did or who didn't. Right. So. And you do it in a big group, and it's an open area, so you kind of see other people going through it as well.
Were you doing, was it mixed men and women, or was it just women?
It was mixed men and women. It was 50 people, believe it or not. And they were like little mattresses side by side in this big warehouse in the mountains of Virginia. And the tribe came. And I remember the first day I cried for 8 hours straight. When I tell you cry, it wasn't like tears. It was like, like that for 8 hours straight. And so when you go through ayahuasca, you're not allowed to touch another person or comfort them because you're interrupting their process. And so you have to allow them to go through it. And ayahuasca goes to where you're the weakest. So people who had back issues were like breathing in back pain. If you had stomach issues, people were like, my stomach. Everyone threw up. They put a bucket next to you, and what you throw up is black. It's completely this black bucket full of whatever. But you become like it's not a thing. You're so not concerned with anyone. It's people think you're tripping, but you're not. You're lucid dreaming.
So when you were crying like that, were you thinking about all the trauma in your youth, or what was causing that?
It's just something opened, and I kept crying, and I kept saying, I'm so sad. I'm so profoundly sad. I'm so sad. I'm so profoundly sad. It was like purging. And I remember there was one point, and people said, holy crap, you cried and cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. I mean, and I would stop for a second and would start again. And every time like the shamans would come and they would pray over you, and they would like, they're the only ones who are allowed to comfort you. So they would just pray, hold your hand and pray over you to like release whatever that was going on. And I remember there was a time when I was like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? And something was as clear as you and I speaking right now. And it said, tonight, you don't get to be the strong one. You get to cry. And I remember I was like, holy crap. And that was so clear. And I was like, I understand. Because every time I held it in and I wasn't allowed to show much emotion or cry, or when I was a kid, and like just it was viewed as weakness, and I got to cry. So imagine years of that.
Feel that repression.
It purged. Yeah. And then in the morning, they give you like a light soup. So the first day is the bitter, and the other day is the sweet. So the bitter is when you purge, and the sweet is when you sort of, they sing different songs, and they put different sort of energies out. And I remember coming in and taking like a cup. They give you a cup of ayahuasca. It's like a syrupy substance. You drink it. And I had a laughing fit for 45 minutes. I mean, if I tell a laughing fit, I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed. I had to leave the room because I was disturbing people. Like I was just laughing, and then it stopped. And no matter if I drank more, nothing was happening. They call you like ayahuasca drunk, which is like you're a little bit loopy. And I went to the shaman and I said, I can't get, ayahuasca drunk. And he said, you're done. That means you're done. Go take a walk, go on a little hike, go enjoy nature. You're done. And so I remember being like so clear-minded and going, wow, okay. So I left. I went for a walk.
So, and then in the weeks following, because you said it was so profoundly transformative, did you feel like it changed something within you that once you let out all that pain that you've been keeping in and hurt, you were just like
a
lighter,
happier person. Like I can tell you those stories and not cry. I don't feel any particular way. It's like something that just happened. It's like a story I'm telling you. My anger towards my parents was gone. I understood that they were young and they, made the best decisions they knew how to make in this. And I mean, they had me at 21,
Wow. Yeah.
And so at 20 and 21, I mean, I'm really holding people responsible who are kids. Thinking about me now having a baby at 21, I don't know what I would do. I wasn't ready, but culturally they had to. And I forgave them because I understood that they just didn't know. And they were product of their environment, right? So they did what their parents did. And so it was a cycle, the corporal punishment, the severe corporal punishment in Eastern European countries is a normal thing to do.
Where did you grow up?
In Ukraine. I'm from Western Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I come from a tough people where you grin and bear, you persevere, you don't complain, you don't cry. And if you cry, you'll be given something to cry about.
Right.
You don't go to a store and say, I want. You don't speak until you're spoken to. You don't, so there's all of these things. You don't speak loudly in public. You don't sing in public. You don't, there were so many don'ts, that, it kills your spirit. And then, you couple with very young parents who separate and then neither wants to parent. And you end up in a place where you're like, what the hell is going on here? There's a lot of, and I repeated the pattern of trying to earn people's love by being the best at everything. Right. I have to be the best at everything because I felt like if I was really the best of everything, I was going to be loved. I picked partners who made me relive that same exact pattern. And it was an ongoing cycle. And I'm like, I can't live like that anymore. And so that was life-changing. And so I felt like in weeks that came after, I was peaceful. I was lighter. I was kinder. I was more introspective. I was less busy. But the brain did not change till recently, till someone suggested that I did psilocybin. And I'm actually on my first 21-day course right now. And if I can tell you the change it's making in my brain, it's incredible.
When you say a 21 course, does that mean like microdosing for 21 days?
Yes, but you do it every third day. So I have 21 pills. And my trading has improved 150%.
Wow. So why is that?
I'm not impulsive and I don't operate from fear. I don't operate from fear and I don't have the anxiety to get into things and to prove myself I'm literally just being, and I've become more of an observer. So I am observing what's happening to me. I was saying, everything tastes better because I am slow, I am present. My brain is so quiet. Sometimes I'm like, where is the anxiety in my brain? Right. I'm waiting for it and it's not coming. I'm almost like 3 weeks, two-thirds of the way in. And just to clarify for people, I'm not tripping out. I'm not seeing things. I'm not going off the deep end. I'm not like kumbayaing all day. The first 3 days, I was very tired. I just was sleepy. It makes you kind of sleepy, but I think your body is so tense all the time. It makes you relax, right? And then all of a sudden, I was like, the things I used to stress about, I'm like, is it stressful, really? It's a weird parallel existence where you're seeing yourself from a different angle. You're looking in at yourself and you're going, well, that just doesn't make any sense. Like, things that used to make me really angry, they don't make me angry. I'm just like, oh, wow, I must feel triggered. I don't know. You become really nicer version of yourself to yourself, first and foremost.
Yeah, I think that's so many people that there's so much power in forgiving other people, because you holding on to hate or resentment, they're not impacted. It just impacts you. But then also forgiving yourself. And that's something I've had a lot of friends that have just in the last few years realized that. And they've told me, and I guess I'm trying to process it, because I think in some ways I'm my own harshest critic, but in other ways I'm also proud of the things that I'm proud of that I've done. So it's like, I feel like I have a pretty good balance, but I know a lot of people, especially successful entrepreneurs and things like that, one of the reasons they're so successful is because they're so hard on themselves, they're never happy. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and be like, hey, I have this checklist of all these awesome accomplishments, but didn't enjoy the journey because I was always trying to look for the next thing. And for me, that's actually, so I've done 2 male only, and they were both jiu-jitsu crews, ayahuasca in Joshua Tree. And it was a Native American place where it's legal and they have their own rules. And I went into the first one. I have a really good friend, Nick Gregoridis. He was actually my very first podcast episode. He was like an early proponent of ayahuasca. And he said, there was actually this beautiful quote. I wrote it down because you got a poem by Mario Andrade, and he's talking about time. And he said, he ends with, we all have 2 lives, and the second begins when you realize you only have one. And my friend Nick says the same thing. He says, I have 2 lives. One was up to that week in Peru when I did the ayahuasca experience, and then the next was after. And he's done it many times since. And the way he talked about it, he might say he's neurodivergent too, because he's very, very sensitive. And that's why he's phenomenal at jiu-jitsu, because he just feels a lot more than the average person. I was so curious because I was like, I think I've battled demons in a way, like all the years in combat sports. I think I was battling my own demons and working through things. And I was like, am I going to have that same thing where when I do a weekend afterwards, I'm a different person? And I don't think mine was as profound as yours. But the one thing that I remember very clearly looking at myself from above and telling myself, you've got so many great things to be grateful for. Stop looking for other things that make you happy. Almost like just be more appreciative for what you have. The second weekend, it was a bit weird because it was 2 days. And after the first day, I kind of had a similar experience to you where I actually went for a walk by myself and I was sitting there in the desert. And I remember my wife was pregnant at the time. And I had a very strong calling, like, you shouldn't be here. You need to be with her. Get back. And I hate being those people that don't follow through. But I remember the next day telling them, I said, guys, I'm so sorry. We had breakfast. I said, I'm so sorry. I've got to change my flight. I've got to get back to my wife. My work here is done. But so mine wasn't quite as profound, but I have that same, I have a much better appreciation for what I have versus what I want. I'm much more appreciative of time and just that the passage of time goes so quickly. There's so many people that I think they're going to have the realization that we're talking about, being happy with what you have and just being a bit more grateful, for the things you have. Like you said, if you're still breathing, it's okay. But they're only going to realize that way too late. And so I'm so grateful I had that now, not when I was 70. So for me, it was less profound, but it was very positive too.
I find that now with psilocybin, I can sit and just be. And I never knew how to do that. In New York, I was be like, okay, I need to get busy. I need to, like, I found myself just peacefully sitting and looking at I live like on top of this mountain, and I have the beach on one side and rainforest on the other side. And I could literally sit there and just breathe and have nothing, right? And really be in the moment present with no other thought. And what a gift that is. I've spent my whole life not being able to sit somewhere and not have 1,000 thoughts tormenting me. And it's just you get that, and no car or mansion would have this type of appreciation, because you get that and then you're like, okay, what's the next thing, right? Yes. Because you know how you're like, if you ever wanted that watch, you just needed that watch. You get that watch, you put it on, you look at it for 2 days straight, and the third day you don't even notice anymore. It's just a watch, right? It's just a watch. And so I don't think I'll ever stop sitting there with a silent mind, looking into the ocean and feeling the freedom and like the best use of time that I have, and not like just consuming everything in sight and instant gratification, constant, need for something to fill the void. Like I feel like I can just be, and what a gift that is. Like I can take full breaths uninterrupted with nothing else going on and no negative self-talk and no beating myself up and no having to do something and no societal pressure, like literally being peaceful. I don't think that gift will ever stop giving. And I don't think any material possession can parallel or even come close to the peace.
And so many people are looking for that peace. And I know exactly what you mean. And that was one of the reasons that we left downtown Chicago, and I live about an hour south, and I'm on 8 acres and it's so peaceful. And I love just hearing the sound of nature. I mean, they have that, I think they call it forest bathing in Japan, where you go out of the city and you go in the forest for your health. They're not doing it. They're not thinking, oh, I'm going to have a fun vacation. They're literally saying, I have to get into nature because it's so unhealthy being in these cities. And I've really noticed that myself. Just I do have a bit of a stressful job and I work a bit more than I want to. That's one of my goals, is to work a little bit less. But being here definitely helps. So I know exactly.
But do you have a job?
Yes,
you have
exactly.
A job? It's making you money?
Yeah.
How's your family? Supporting your family?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, everyone's well.
Everyone's well. What more? Exactly. What more do you need? Yeah. And especially because, I come from a trading background. You're trading currently. Because the metric of trading is pure numbers, it's hard to not get caught up in that. So that's why it's so impressive that you're in that world for your day job, but your mind isn't there.
I don't need all the money in the world. I as long as I capture a piece of the action, I have food on my table and everyone I care for is taken care of. What's the opportunity cost? Like I always think about opportunity cost. Like I can sit here all day and continue to trade, but like, what's the opportunity cost? Like that time, we only have one life. Like, do I want to, people get into trading to become less enslaved, but then they become even more enslaved because the greed, right? And the greed takes it over and then a slave again, but differently.
I was going to say, that's what's so great about where you're living and you appreciating nature is I see so many of my friends where as their wealth goes up, their income, goes up, their habits, their house, their car payments, their expected vacations, all that goes up with it. So they never feel wealthy. They never have excess money. They're always on this hamster wheel. And like you said, you're missing the most important thing is just enjoying every day and this precious time we have.
And there's like this one thing they get is going to be the next thing. It's only going to be temporary. It's literally like a drug, right? You get that hit, but then you get a bigger hit and a bigger hit and a bigger hit and a bigger hit. And you're like, when do you stop being a junkie? Because, we think of junkies are only those who use recognized drugs. But I think we're all junkies. We're all junkies, whether it be for food or attention or recognition or material possessions. We're all junkies. And, when you look at it that way, you have a little more compassion for those who literally are struggling with substances and stuff, because better. Your junkie is different. Your drug is different, Well, so my goal is to try to minimize the amount of drugs that I'm addicted to. And I'm not talking about physical drugs. I'm talking about like life drugs that we don't call that, but the need for them is equal, and our jonesing for like the next best thing is the same. So
see, Faina, that's I'm so passionate about that. So many people have in their mind, they don't think anything about being addicted to coffee, smoking cigarettes, being addicted to alcohol 4 or 5 times a week, getting really drunk. But they look at like, oh, marijuana is terrible. Whereas if you look at the history, I was just reading about the history of marijuana the other day. It's been used throughout Asia, India, Europe, North America, South America. And the earliest use was 2700 BC. So you have like 5,000 years of this. And it's so much better for you. So I gave up alcohol 6 years ago. And I think a tiny, mild, edible in the evening has made my life so much better on so many levels. And it doesn't make me feel bad in the morning. I sleep great. And then, like you said, that there's the drugs of power, the drugs of money, the drugs of prestige, all those kind of drugs too. There's so many drugs, but in Western society, you're completely normal if you drink regularly. You get all this stuff from your doctor, things to like Adderall, things to Ambien to sleep, all these other drugs. But yeah, a lot of people, and luckily this is changing, but a lot of people, that's normal. But what's not normal is to go in the desert and do a ceremony with ayahuasca. Or something, they think that's weird, but how late they live is normal. And for me, I look at it the other way around,
Yeah, they say, oh, so now you're going to be on drugs all the time. And I'm like, well, that's your understanding. Like, I don't have the need to explain to you why my peace is important or how I got there, But I think a lot of people with a lot of trauma can benefit from psilocybin. I really think a lot of neurodivergent people can, because I have a friend of mine, and I turned on to it and she said, holy crap, I'm so peaceful. That was the first thing you get, how peaceful you are. And so you basically, what you're doing is you're not supposed to do it continuously. You do it in cycles. So I do my first cycle and then I'm going to take a few months off and I'm going to do another cycle. So basically you're creating new neural pathways because your brain is so used to working in a certain way. And this is interrupting it and is just putting a different way of your brain to work. That becomes your new normal. And so I'm just trying to create a new normal where this like anxious mind is not a thing, where my overreactions and overstimulation, where I'm just learning to be peaceful in the moment and present, right? And so it's not something that I'm going to be doing my whole life. I'm going to do it until I find that my brain is now functioning in the new normal. Yes. And that new normal, you just reinforce. Because when you do psilocybin, like you don't want to really eat bad food. It makes you kind of nauseous. Because I think it's vibrational, right? So you like don't vibrate with bad things. It gives you a slight aversion to alcohol. Because I love wine, not because I like to get drunk, but I really enjoy a good bottle of wine for the taste, for the craftsmanship, for like the nature. That's just what I love. And the days that I do psilocybin, which is like every third day, I can't have any alcohol. I'll take a sip and it literally makes me want to vomit. And I think those people with alcohol dependencies can definitely benefit from it because there's something, it relaxes the body where you don't no longer need to like get filler. You're not running. You're just present, peacefully present. So that alcohol is not just vibrating with you. It's like, oh, that's no good for me. And I also found that like strenuous cardiovascular activity does not work. Your body wants like yoga, stretching, something gentle. I tried to get on a bike yesterday. I almost puked on my bike. It's like, so basically any anxious behavior, any endorphin-based behavior, your body will immediately reject because it's creating a new neural pathway of like just being peaceful without needing that adrenaline rush. Right. So it's really odd. Your body's saying like, no. Sit down and be quiet and be peaceful. And so on these days, I'm going to do more of like a stretching or a yoga or something gentle, a swim, something like that. So it's interesting how my brain is like rewiring itself to operate in a new normal. And I'm like an observant to it. Yeah. And so you're like, oh, wow, look, this is the new makeup. Like, what'd you do yesterday? I'm like, I can't tell you. I sat outside for a bit and then I think I painted and then but not to, like, I trade in the morning. So like, it doesn't make me incapable of performing my duties. I'm not like, right. Because I feel like people disconnect from reality and that is not sustainable, right? Because you have to come back eventually.
I think it's all about two things, finding what works for you and doses. So in terms of finding what everyone who's listening to this or that have gone down these routes, like what you said earlier about how you can drink 3 cups of coffee and then go and take a nap, whereas I couldn't. I'd have to go for a run, or so I have all this energy. So we have to find what works for us, but also dosing, I think, is so important. So I had a friend, Leon, I don't talk to him anymore, but he was my buddy in college when we were 18, and he was a huge stoner. And he would play the guitar. He was a really good guitar player. And he would just get high and mess around his guitar all day. And then by the end of the year, of course, he failed his exams. They kicked him out because he never went to classes. And so I had never really tried it growing up. And for me, I had the association marijuana equals loser because of this guy for 20 years. And then now I realized that it's because the dosage was all wrong. He was getting way too high. And then, of course, it was screwing up his life. Whereas a very, very minor dose just brings you down a little bit so you can be more present. And I feel like I appreciate life more from a very minor dose. So I think we all have to find what works for us.
You have to get this from like a reliable source, because basically it comes in a capsule. It comes in a capsule, and it's a specific mushroom for a specific purpose, and it's weighted, right? So each capsule is my dose. So you don't measure it out yourself, and you get some people who are well versed in just natural herbal healing to aid a dose that source the proper mushroom for you, and then also to ration it for you. And it comes like and if I tell you it's like a micro thing.
Yes.
And that has like such a macro effect on you, because I'm not there to get high. I'm not there to escape. I'm not there to hallucinate and to hug trees. This is not, my fear was that I wasn't going to be able to work. And none of it is true. Matter of fact, I'm having the best trading streak the last 3 weeks, the most disciplined, less anxious. And like, if I lose, I go, okay, today wasn't my day. When before I'd be like, you stupid, how could you? And then I would get back in there, try to make it up and lose even more. I'm able to say, okay, today it didn't work out my way. I'm going to go look at the water for a minute. It just takes that whole like angst away. So I think we all should try it.
All right, 100%. We've got to find what works for us. Listen, I know you've got friends in town. I don't want to take up all your day, but last thing I have to ask you, because I think it's so awesome. You set up your own foundation for victims of domestic violence. How did that happen, and how has that changed you?
Well, my organization is called Women in Need PR, and because when PR, I'm big on acronyms. And when I came during the pandemic, the domestic violence, especially in Puerto Rico, and small islands where it's sort of like culturally accepted, went up 37%. These women were locked in homes, so nobody could see the bruises, nobody could see the abuse that was going on, because they were no longer going to work. And the shelters were overwhelmed, and the only place they could run to was a shelter. And they were so overwhelmed, they would just release people within the 2 weeks, and they had no place to go. And imagine not having any skills, not knowing the first thing, not having a community. You will just go back to your abuser. It's just inevitable. Yeah. And so there were women here being like drugged and thrown off the bridge. There were women here being burned. Yeah. And when I started to read this, I said, oh my goodness, is there somewhere they can go to talk, even to say I'm in trouble, right? Before it's too late. And they said, no, there's nothing. So I took over this building that was abandoned for 15 years. And I spent a year with another person, and we ourselves cleaned it out. I took out drop ceilings. It was infested with termites, dead cats, I'm sure ghosts. It was just horrible. When I opened the door, I just sat on the floor. But can I see the next step? Can I see the next step? Can I see the next step? And I figured, you know what? My life has stopped. So let me focus not on, my anxiety, but on what I can do with it. It's better to focus on others when you're in trouble. So I went to just worked on that center, and we opened our doors. And now the center, we do a lot of outreaches. We are a big sister to foster care for little girls ages from 4 to 13. During a hurricane, we delivered 27 stoves, little gas stoves, to the top of the mountain so these people can eat. We try to help those women, a home of girls who are pregnant and abandoned by their families. We try to basically create a community of women. We just ran a 2-week workshop for those women who wanted to learn how to read, how to sew. We do computer literacy. In the fall, we're going to start tutoring little kids of those women who can't afford it, because my goal is to break the cycle. And to break the cycle is to have these young women see, do, be better. And New York Department of Education just gave me, I'm super excited, 3 high school girls interns for the summer. So they working remotely with me on helping me. So I get to mentor these young girls in the area of giving back. And I'm starting to build a really great community of women who are coming forth, and we've helped a number of women in different ways. We have an attorney that works pro bono for those women who need to get an order of protection, because in Puerto Rico, it works in a very weird way, and you can literally violate it by doing the silliest things. Like if your abuser talks to you and you talk back, you just violated it, and it negates it. And so people know that, like, there's just all these loopholes. So my goal is to really create a long-lasting change and impact, and inspire and help the young women find themselves sooner. I'm trying to do what I wish somebody would have done for me.
That's so beautiful.
And we're starting a garden in the back, so we're going to grow our own herbs, and the women get to tend to we're going to do yoga for little kids, and it's picking up speed because more and more people getting involved. The funny thing is I'm Jewish, so I just got put into a group called the Jew Crew of PR, and I'm part of the Jew Crew of PR, and the Jew Crew of PR. We are so many people are reaching out, and we're going to do a lot, because to be here on this Act 60, which is the tax break, you have to donate to a nonprofit, and you have to buy a home now, which is a whole other thing. Anyway, so more and more people are looking for organizations to donate to. And I'm really excited to present us as a viable option, because we get to do a larger outreach and hit the areas. There's an area of Cayenne that's the top of the mountain, and it's really affected by landslides. And so when the hurricane happens, nobody can get to them. And a lot of old people live there. And so they were literally stranded without food or water. And so we brought, I think it was 4 different mattresses and car seats and food and clothes. And so at this time, I'm doing all sorts of drives to be proactive before the hurricane season hits, and stacking their community centers so they can get at least, because they got the stoves. So they were so excited. They all have the little propane stoves. At least you can eat. And so my goal is to just build a bigger community.
I really love that. I love what you said about, I want to be the person that I wished I had had when I was a little girl. I think that's so powerful. And I think the sense of, you don't get it living in a city because it's too big, but I'm finding that here now, where I'm in this small town in the country, and you have so much more of a sense of community. And it seems like you've really found that. It's so beautiful. Please send me,
We're building it.
Or something. Yeah, I want to help spread the word. And I think it's so awesome, because I can see how much happiness you get from it. And also, Faina, I love what you said about when you're kind of in a tough time, focus on giving back, and you're going to get so much happiness in that roundabout way. And I've given that same advice to people. I'm like, just get involved and give back and do charity work, because it's going to come back to you. It's not you being selfless in a weird way. It's good for you to do it, but people don't really see it like that. So I think that's, you're living.
Take the attention of yourself. We're so self-centered. We're so self-centered. And when you dig and you realize there's so many people worse off than you.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And not to diminish anyone's pain, by the way, people, it doesn't mean that what you're going through is not valid, but it's relative.
No, but that perspective helps. So I think if you're complaining about life and you've picked up a coffee from Starbucks, you're already in the 1% of the global wealth of the population. So you're just in a very, wealthy country, so you don't see it. So sometimes by doing things like this, and you see, like you said, it just gives you more perspective, and perspective gives you happiness. So absolutely love it.
Yeah. And if whatever speaks to you, whatever, just do something. It doesn't matter what organization. I'm not, saying this is the only one. Find something. There is always someone who needs your help. Do something, anything. So that's how I would like to finish it. Do something.
Well, listen, that's beautiful. Between you finding that passion and mission in that, and also you finding real happiness through psychedelics, that's really why I want to talk to you. I think that's so awesome, and I'm looking for the same in myself. So thank you so much. And if there's any final thoughts, I'll give you the last word.
I think you should read the end of that poem one more time. I think that's a good place to finish this.
We all have 2 lives, and the second begins when you realize you only have one. Yeah, I absolutely love that. Faina, thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you for having me.
This was such a pleasure.
Have a great weekend, and I hope to speak to you again soon.